Hello and welcome to the Analysys Mason podcast. My name is Christopher Baugh. I'm a partner in Analysys Mason. I head up our space research practice. It's my honor and privilege, actually, to welcome the session today. We're going to cover a big topic, which is the very recent news of Amazon acquiring Globalstar and at a nice big number of 11.6 billion. We're going to look at it from a number of different angles, which is why we have a star-studded cast on the podcast today. So I'm going to introduce them, and then we're going to jump right in. First, we have Jeanette Stewart, who is a partner on our European consulting team. Next, we have Yuk Palerm, who is a research director, works with the EMI space research team. And last but not least, Dongyi Liu, who is an analyst also within the space research team. We're going to look at spectrum. We're going to look at impact of strategic sort of aspects of this, what this means in the market, maybe handset discussions, a lot to unpack. But just to kind of set the stage of what the deal is, Amazon agreed to purchase Globalstar for $11.6 billion. And I had to correct myself for a second because I thought that was the largest Amazon acquisition ever. And it isn't, obviously, because they purchased Whole Foods, a grocery, whether it's brick and mortar or delivery. I thought for sure this was the biggest one, but it wasn't. So Whole Foods was 13.7. So there you go. So the deal includes all the Globalstar satellites, spectrum, operational expertise, et cetera. Impacts are Amazon Leo, which is their big Leo play of adding a direct-to-device capability to it. And then an important aspect we'll cover is the Apple relationship and how that's going to form going forward. So Yuk, I'm going to go to you first and ask really the why now piece. Why did this happen? Is this a knee-jerk just to Starlink, or what caused this big deal to occur now?
Right, and that makes a lot of sense with understanding the why now. So D2D is moving from a far-fetched long-term idea to something real today. So we see more and more MNOs now starting to partner with Starlink, with AST, with other D2D provider. In fact, in the last 6 months, we saw that number going from 57 MNOs to 67 MNOs, and more of those deals are about launching actual D2D services, not just testing or some kind of long-term amount. Those are real actual services happening today. And there are a lot of barriers building around that in terms of access to spectrum, which is very key for the D2D services, in terms of building those integrations with MNO. So it was very clear that if Amazon wanted to play in this D2D market, they have to make a big move very soon. And the Globalstar answers that point.
Okay, so it was the right time, opportunity, and there are only so many of these that have this kind of spectrum that they have, and we'll cover to Jeanette in a second on spectrum, but makes good sense from a timing perspective. But I'm assuming there's a lot behind the curve in terms of opportunity and how big this market is. So, and we've covered this for many, many years now. So maybe, Dongyi, you could set the stage for how big this opportunity is, and just to kind of build up whether it's the TAM or revenue potential and kind of part of that why statement.
So in our view, the D2C market will reach over 40 billion US dollars in annual revenue by 2034. And it won't arrive all at once. So we believe the market is likely to evolve through a 4-stage progression. Stage 1 is emergency SOS. This is pretty much safety-led and does not generate a lot of revenue. Stage 2 is basic messaging. This is where usage becomes more frequent, and it's also the phase where we're currently seeing most of commercial launches. Stage 3 and 4 are where things start to get exciting and start to scale, which are voice and data services. So they offer much higher utility and also, more importantly, a higher willingness to pay. So that's why we're saying this is the real revenue opportunity. So we believe in 2034, most of the revenue will come from data-centric roaming-style use cases, and that's consistent with our consumer survey results, which shows that data roaming is the service that most people feel willing to pay extra for. Around 27 of our respondents said, I'm willing to pay extra for it. And what's perhaps interesting is that we see light data services actually start to appear ahead of voice calling. So some operators already started to support messaging apps, basic navigations, Google Apps, etc. And that just tells us where consumer interest is really strongest today, and also where the biggest revenue opportunity will eventually emerge. So yeah. And in terms of timeline, we expect a wide adoption of high bandwidth D2D applications to take off around 2028, 2029. So a couple of years from today, as the industry needs some time to solve the hurdles around standardization, technology innovation, and integration of standard-based modems into smartphone ecosystem. Capacity also needs to grow a lot to support D2D voice and data services at scale. We've seen developments like Starlink's newest generation of constellation, which we believe will deliver significantly higher bandwidth and overall network capability.
Excellent. So if I could just kind of set the stage for the next step in our discussion. The MNOs are increasingly signing up for this. There is demand. We've shown with a survey, a very extensive survey, users want it. We'll pay more for it, generally. And the expectation is set. So the foundation's there. Now let's turn to what some have argued is the majority value of this deal, which is spectrum. And that's why I'm turning to Jeanette, who's an expert in our team on satellite and terrestrial spectrum, everything. So Jeanette, you look at some of the deals in space, Starlink with EchoStar, 17 billion base plus another couple of billion on the back end of it. You look at AST, what they did with Legato, 550 million upfront. These are big numbers. And then 11.6 for Globalstar. Can you talk a bit about importance of this spectrum, of why this matters so much, and thinking importance to, again, Amazon Leo with their strategy into the future?
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, so as you've all described, I think spectrum is probably one of the big prizes in this deal. As Luke described, if Amazon's looking to deploy a LEO constellation, they need some spectrum in order to do that. The real value of Globalstar spectrum is that the spectrum that Globalstar holds is in the 3GPP specifications, which are the specifications that the mobile network operators and the mobile industry use to design their products, their networks, their devices, etc. In our consulting team, we have a product called a terrestrial spectrum auction tracker. And in that tracker, we track the price paid for mobile spectrum around the world. So we can actually look at that tracker and look at an equivalent spectrum band to the one that Globalstar has. So Globalstar has spectrum in what 3P calls LS band. But if we look specifically at the S band and the terrestrial S band, in our spectrum auction tracker, we can look at the prices paid for that spectrum, and we can see that generally prices are in the range of around about 0.1 to 0.2 or 3 USD per megahertz per population. And if you multiply that number up by the potential global population, which is possibly addressable by Globalstar spectrum, and you also multiply it by the bandwidth which Globalstar has available, which is approximately 10 megahertz, then quite quickly you will get to the sorts of figures that Amazon paid. I'm not going to do that sum live on this podcast, but broadly we're in the range. We would take care when we were adjusting these benchmarks to think about really what the global market opportunity is for Globalstar spectrum. Even though the spectrum rights might be global, they may not be nationally deployable. You need to have national authorization in each market. So you might think that there are some large markets where Globalstar spectrum is not available, so you would reduce your population accordingly. We would also normalize and adjust for size of the market, etc. So there are various things that we would do, but using our benchmarks, we can come up with that sort of figure. And it does seem as if the spectrum, because it's harmonized, is in one of the frequency bands that 3GPP has adopted in its latest specifications. All of that is playing into the value. And as Dongi said, the real critical factor here for D2D adoption is that the spectrum and the devices are part of the ecosystem, and Globalstar spectrum is clearly offering that.
And it's interesting that you think about the spectrum from space to ground. So for D2D in general, as I mentioned off the top, there aren't many of these. This is a prize, I guess, but you said the value is within the range. I guess you can count almost on one hand how many companies potentially have access to global harmonized or mostly global harmonized spectrum in these bands. Is that right?
Yes, indeed, that's right. So we have another tracker product actually in your space program, Chris, which is a space satellite tracker product that we've just launched this year. And in that product, we look at the satellite operators that hold spectrum in the L and the S bands. Now, these are the frequency bands that are currently standardized in 3GPP's specifications below 3 gigahertz. And from that tracker, you can see that there's a relatively small number of satellite operators holding spectrum rights in the L band and the S band. So that makes this, that's really why this is such a prize. There's really only a small number of players. Some of the players that do hold L band and S band spectrum are obviously already using that spectrum for traditional mobile satellite services. So that's the traditional land mobile satellite handsets that would be used in land mobile and maritime and aviation, etc. So there's a relatively small number that hold these rights, and that's why this is really quite an interesting development.
Interesting. Now, there is another way to do this, which is not from space, but actually using terrestrial spectrum to enable direct-to-device. So reauthorizing terrestrial spectrum for use for direct-to-device services from space. So not having access to that, again, the MSS side is one angle. The other side, can you speak to that? Is that as feasible? Are there challenges involved with using terrestrial spectrum to enable D2D that are, again, contrary to this method or model that Globalstar offers?
So that is correct. There are two methods of providing direct-to-device. So using mobile satellite spectrum is what we've just been discussing. The other approach is using spectrum, which is licensed to mobile network operators for terrestrial services, and putting that spectrum into satellites. Now, in fact, that approach has been reasonably popular in the early stages of direct-to-device development. And the reason really is that terrestrial spectrum is already in mobile handsets. So it offers a very good way to test the market and to very quickly launch services. That approach, using the terrestrial spectrum, is not without its challenges, though. The spectrum itself is used in terrestrial networks. So different mobile network operators have different amounts of spectrum in different markets. So it is up to the operator to be able to clear some spectrum of terrestrial use in order to make that available for satellite use. What we're seeing, interestingly, so far is that the spectrum that's being made available from terrestrial use is quite small in the bandwidth. So it's usually sort of the order of around about 10 megahertz. And as you've been looking at in your space forecasts, and Donkey mentioned as well, that the bandwidth is driving a lot of things, and one of the things that the bandwidth is driving is the types of service. So with only 10 megahertz, you can do certain things. The capacity is limited. You can do messaging. Some players have demonstrated voice, etc. Really, though, to scale it up and to get higher volumes, and as demand grows, then more spectrum is needed. So that 10 megahertz increasingly is going to become congested.
Okay. It's very interesting. And that's, again, two ways to look at it, two different approaches, equally interesting. But let's go to one of the other, almost a third party in this, which is Apple, and discussing Apple at the moment. Dongi, maybe to talk through devices was mentioned, it consistently is mentioned as a key barrier to wide-scale adoption of direct-to-device, and the role that Apple has in this deal. And this gives Amazon access to Apple and their devices through that partnership. Wondering where devices from your perspective comes into this in general. So Apple being an investor in Globalstar, obviously being the key investor in Globalstar going, but that was a strategic sort of interesting way how this played out. So Donnie, maybe you could give some context to the devices and how that Apple angle fits into this.
So, yes, so devices are certainly a big barrier for mass adoption of D2D, and one of our trackers show that the number of smartphones with D2D capabilities increased from 75 in September last year, increased to 96 in March 2026. This is a good progress. There's still a lot of work to do, as these devices currently still focus on high-end segments of the market. Apple is strategic investor in Globalstar, and it had 85% of the Globalstar constellation booked for its own use. But it has been increasingly difficult for Apple to ensure a differentiated services as Starlink's D2D capabilities advance. So we believe this is a mutually beneficial deal, with Amazon inheriting a large pool of compatible devices and Apple getting a partner that is eager to continue investing and developing the capabilities. I guess the next thing to watch is what will happen with other smartphone providers apart from Apple in terms of their compatibility with Amazon's D2D constellation.
Okay. And this was a question I had when the deal was announced. It was mentioned Apple, and they have to be part of this deal given their investment in Globalstar. But outside of those, what other devices will this support? So that's a key question I think that will probably play out over time. Want to go though to you guys, a question on timeline for this, because the timeline was mentioned 2028, and we know Amazon Leo at the moment, and I'm speaking to the satellite part of Amazon, launches everything to them, getting access to launch, and it's a big challenge. So 2028 for this network, ambitious or not? How do you see such a timeline, given it's, I hate to say it, right around the corner?
Right. So that's definitely ambitious, as you say. So first, let's start first with what Globalstar have planned so far. So they were planning an upgrade of the current Globalstar constellation with MDA. There are not a lot of details yet, but it seems that based on the announcement, they are going to honor that bill, like what Starlink did with EchoStar and NDA. So that's going to keep the NDA manufacturing line busy for the next couple of months. But after that, it seems that Amazon is planning a Gen 2 and a next generation constellation for this Globalstar D2D constellations on 2020. That's aggressive, I would say, considering what they have on the pipeline for the broadband side of things, how that has suffered some delays, and it's struggling to get satellite launch to meet the FCC deadlines. So I would say it's ambitious to think about 2028, but they definitely need to be aggressive there to catch up with Starlink, because on parallel, Starlink is planning the Gen 2 constellation on the same timeline to offer more advanced services beyond the basic data services that they offer today.
Okay. And it's interesting. There's only so much real estate on board a satellite. So if you do put a D2D payload on, how that impacts the rest of the Amazon Leo business as well. So there's a very interesting, with lots of questions, I guess. So as analysts, I have a million questions. That's one part of it. But let's almost near the end here, but I have one quick question and we'll do a summary. The landscape now, this must completely have shaken the landscape. It must for D2D right now. This is a massive deal. The impact is enormous. So from your side, the landscape perspective of what this means both in space and on the ground, and Jeanette, anyone else who wants to weigh in on.
Yeah, to start from the lecturer's point of view. So obviously, AST, being on space, Quality, Skylo, all these players that were active on the D2D arena now have a very strong competitor with a lot of investment capacity. I mean, they made very clear that they want to invest heavily on this market. So yeah, that puts some questions on their side in terms of will they be able to match that investment capacity to continue investing to be competitive in this ecosystem. That might trigger some further consolidation. And yeah, we also need to think about the differentiated opportunities here. It's not just about consumer D2D, but there are also opportunities in IoT, defense, in automobile. So how can these other players can focus on these differentiated markets to stay competitive in the ecosystem?
And Jeanette, to you as well. I'm sure there are implications for MNOs on the ground. I mean, this is again, just an enormous deal.
Yeah, definitely. I think for mobile network operators, it does add another choice, as Luke said. So they were not short of choices already. There was already Starlink Mobile, AST, there was OmniSpace Link, there's going to be Viasat with Space 42. So this is another viable choice. And for mobile network operators, I suppose a key issue is for them to be central in the value chain of these emerging services. The services are being delivered to handsets of the customers of the mobile network. Assuming Amazon is going to work with the mobile network operators, which I think it has said in the announcements, then this is really interesting. And as Luke said, it's another it's another alternative. And I think the choice ultimately is going to be a complex one actually for different mobile operators. It's not just about the capability of the constellation or the commercials. There's a lot of regulatory questions as well. There's sovereignty debates, etc. So there's a whole mix of questions here. It's going to be really interesting, I think.
Very interesting how it plays out. And you mentioned a key word, which I love to hear, the alternative piece, because space has kind of been put into a box of SpaceX, or bless them, but at the end of the day, it's good. The clients, others, having an alternative is a good thing. Now, if we could just solve the launch bottleneck, which, as I come back to with Amazon, they have satellites ready to go, just not enough resource to launch them, and Starship will come eventually too. So lots of debate, lots of question, a huge deal. I want to thank you all. Great podcast. Thank you for your inputs. There is more content on this topic. Jeanette mentioned some trackers. We have space. We do cover terrestrial, everything in between. Engage with us. Ask us your questions. We'd love to have a dialogue going on this topic and onwards. And to automatically receive future episodes, please subscribe to the Analysys Mason podcast on our website. Thank you for listening.